Caterpillar, once an unstoppable force that constructed highways, powered military operations, and shaped American industry, is now completely abandoning the United States. This isn't merely a corporate decision. It's akin to an industrial earthquake. Communities are shocked, workers feel betrayed, and America's global stature has taken a significant blow. Why would a powerhouse like Caterpillar forsake its roots? Is it solely driven by profit, or is there a deeper underlying reason? And how will this profound decision reverberate through job markets, communities, and the future of American manufacturing? Understanding the truth behind this monumental shift is crucial because it transcends the fate of a single company. It speaks to the very future of U.S. industry itself. In towns like Peoria, Illinois, where Caterpillar once defined existence, entire zip codes were sustained by its presence. Generations of workers, machinists, welders, engineers built their lives around the rhythm of Caterpillar's assembly lines. For instance, a retired machinist cherishes a miniature D7E model, a relic from an era when the town flourished. Today, his daughter works in a local school cafeteria, where the budget hinges on taxes paid by the plant. But it's not just about economics. Caterpillar is ingrained in the town's identity. The high school football team proudly calls itself the Bulldozers, and the 4th of July parade showcases floats crafted from old track frames. In Peoria, Caterpillar yellow is as ubiquitous as the American flag. The company's economic impact extends beyond its gates. The local median household income has historically exceeded the state average by about 20%, thanks to the abundance of well-paid jobs. Now, with Caterpillar's departure, these communities face an uncertain future. Local businesses, from coffee shops to hardware stores, may struggle without the steady patronage of Caterpillar employees. The ripple effects are profound, touching not just livelihoods, but the social fabric that Caterpillar wove into these towns over decades. This seismic shift prompts a critical reflection on America's industrial landscape and its future trajectory. Understanding the implications goes beyond economic statistics. It's about preserving the essence of communities that relied on Caterpillar for more than just jobs. Everything in town revolves around Caterpillar's payroll, like planets around a star. The local school district depends heavily on property taxes from Caterpillar's massive facilities. On the surface, life feels steady, until suddenly it's not. Before dawn, whispers spread. A press release is imminent, but no one knows what it will say. This is pressure cooker economics in action. When nickel prices rise just 10 cents, a single bulldozer can cost millions more to produce. That's the harsh reality confronting Caterpillar's leadership. As global commodity prices for steel, copper, and diesel steadily climb, the costs of building heavy machinery skyrocket. 2 years of unpredictable tariffs on imported components like bearings and hydraulic hoses have only worsened the situation, eroding profit margins. Inside Caterpillar's boardroom, tension runs high. Project Sandstorm is the code name for a confidential study exploring offshoring options. Ironically, the tariff policies introduced under President Donald Trump, intended to shield American manufacturers, have instead backfired, driving production costs to unsustainable levels. The once finely tuned global supply chain now looks like a vulnerability. Shareholders are growing uneasy, fearing that the company's rock-solid reputation may be at risk. Meanwhile, Chinese state-supported rivals are flooding the market with machines priced nearly 50% lower. On another front, looming carbon border taxes from the European Union threaten to strip Caterpillar of any remaining pricing leverage. The company's leadership concludes that staying in the US may mean financial ruin. By 6 a.m., the board has reached a verdict. A spreadsheet lays open on the conference table as the final vote is cast. Silence follows, heavy with the magnitude of the moment. The statement is short, 5 sentences, 218 words, but it's enough to send shockwaves through the country. The announcement confirms it. Caterpillar is shutting down US manufacturing and shifting production overseas. Within seconds, the news hits the wires. A factory siren sounds unexpectedly, summoning workers. Phones buzz with breaking alerts. People exchange stunned looks. Caterpillar's stock jumps in pre-market trading. Investors see the cost-cutting as a win. But insurance providers raise political risk premiums, while competitors' shares climb, anticipating a shift in demand. President Trump, long a champion of domestic industry, reacts angrily in a live address. He calls the decision a betrayal of American workers and promises a new jobs charter aimed at punishing corporations that abandon U.S. soil. In contrast, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney issues an invitation for Caterpillar to relocate north, highlighting Canada's more lenient labor and environmental regulations. Back on the factory floor, the initial shock turns into quiet disbelief. Workers wonder, unsure what to say or do. Some already have their phones to their ears, calling union reps, desperate for answers in the face of an uncertain future. But The silence echoing through the empty assembly lines speaks louder than any presidential tweet. We took a deep dive into how Caterpillar's abrupt departure is reshaping entire towns and industries, breaking down the true consequences and what it signals for the future of American manufacturing. If you value in-depth, thoughtful reporting like this, consider subscribing and dropping a like. It genuinely helps us keep going. Paychecks have turned into paper cuts. Friday's payout was the last, and no one even had a chance to say goodbye. On the line, one third-generation welder got the news via a push notification while coaching his son's Little League game, facility closure, and immediate layoff flashing across his phone. His heart sank as thoughts of mortgage payments, health insurance, and his daughter's college savings flooded his mind. He wiped his hands on his jeans, stunned, while the kids wrapped up practice, unaware that the job that funded their uniforms might be gone for good. That night, he sat with his wife, staring at the official company notice glowing from the laptop screen. Years of loyal work, gone in an instant. No severance, just a cold invitation to attend a webinar on how to apply. For unemployment, his wife circled bill due dates on the family budget. They ran the numbers over and over, trying to face a new, frightening financial reality. Their emergency savings account looked smaller than they remembered. Within 48 hours, unemployment claims in Caterpillar towns spiked 38%. Job centers saw long lines of newly laid-off workers, many stunned, some angry, others already planning moves to other states in search of work. The local diner, once filled with stories from the factory floor, fell silent as regulars scrolled grim headlines on their phones. Families who once lived comfortably now faced uncertainty. Couples stayed up late, calculating how long their mortgage grace period would last. Some children postponed college plans. Next door, a couple who both worked at the plant took a double hit. They discussed selling one of their cars just to keep the lights on. Even those who thought they were financially prepared realized that a total loss of income was something they'd never truly planned for. The crisis reached beyond wages. Health insurance began to lapse. Community clinics braced for an influx of patients suddenly uninsured. Longtime doctors and nurses, familiar with these families, prepared for the ripple effect of coverage gaps. At the pharmacy, customers who once paid with insurance now asked about cash prices or skipped medications altogether. The Union Hall became a gathering place, not with answers, but with coffee, sandwiches, and solidarity. Organizers scrambled to understand the legal fallout of such sudden mass layoffs. Some workers began to discuss the possibility of a class action lawsuit, searching for a way to fight back against the collapse of a world they thought was built to last. But most workers just want to know how they'll survive the next few weeks. At the Union Hall, the president urges solidarity, but the anxious faces in the crowd say everything. No one knows what comes next. The personal financial pain is just the beginning. The aftershocks are already hitting Main Street. Municipal budgets, once stable, begin to unravel. What was once a numbers game is now a scramble for survival. In towns reliant on Caterpillar, mayors call emergency council meetings to discuss 5% tax hikes and cutbacks on essential services. Snowplow routes are slashed. Potholes go unrepaired. Schools prepare for brutal budget cuts that could impact both extracurriculars and core subjects. Without Caterpillar's once massive tax payments, local governments are left scrambling. In Peoria, the mayor delivers a grim address. Police and fire departments brace for layoffs. Residents pack town halls. Some demand accountability, others propose solutions. But the truth is stark. Without Caterpillar, even basic public services are on the chopping block. Schools are among the hardest hit. Elementary classrooms prepare to merge. Teachers worry about overcrowding and reduced support. Parents fear a decline in education quality. Sports programs face budget cuts, and the band director warns students they may lose access to instruments. At the library, staff prepare for shorter hours, and some books are packed away into storage. The head librarian whispers, "This isn't just about money, it's about what holds us together." Patrons gather to share what the library meant. To them, story times, quiet study, a safe haven in the community. Small businesses feel the squeeze too. The hardware store across from the plant, once bustling after shifts, now sits quiet. Its owner watches as foot traffic dries up. The diner that once welcomed crowds of hungry workers now serves only a few retirees. Property tax revenues drop as Caterpillar's sprawling facilities sit idle. Fire stations suspend over time. Classrooms close. The once optimistic city council now fears for the town's survival. Behind the scenes, librarians mourn the slow dismantling of public knowledge. They hope their stories will carry weight against the cold calculus of vanishing revenue. Families struggle, but so do the institutions built to support them. Washington hears the echoes and erupts. Capitol Hill becomes a battlefield. Midwestern senators grill the Commerce Secretary, blaming trade and tariff policies for driving Caterpillar out. The Secretary pushes back, claiming short-term pain for long-term gain. Meanwhile, populist lawmakers threaten to block new trade deals, arguing current policies devastate American workers. Media outlets jump on the story, hosting fiery debates. Some pundits blame globalization, saying U.S. companies can't compete with cheaper labor overseas. Others point fingers at unions, arguing that high wages made the plants unsustainable. Still others call out corporate greed, accusing Caterpillar of prioritizing shareholder profits over community loyalty. Political action committees release donor maps, revealing deep industry ties on both sides of the aisle. Public opinion polls show a fractured nation. Some cling to free trade, others demand economic nationalism. Many are furious that an iconic American company could walk away so easily. Others see it as the inevitable outcome of a globalized economy. On social media, workers vent their anger. Some blame the administration, others feel betrayed by Caterpillar itself. The national conversation grows more polarized, more volatile. Communities search for someone, anyone, to blame. In this climate of uncertainty and outrage, unions begin to sharpen their next move. The playbook is changing. The fight is far from over. That's the question union leaders ask themselves as the industrial landscape shifts beneath their feet. Long anchored in factory floors and picket lines, the union now faces an existential threat. With Caterpillar's plants shuttered, traditional tactics become obsolete. Organizers pivot to digital pickets, corporate shareholder disruptions, and social media campaigns, trying to maintain leverage in a workforce that's increasingly fractured. In emergency meetings, union leadership grapples with the rise of freelance heavy equipment technicians, gig workers who prefer flexibility over union cards. Membership shrinks as retirees leave, and younger workers seek fluid, non-traditional jobs. The writing is on the wall. Adapt or disappear. An unexpected lifeline appears when tech worker coalitions approach with a radical proposal, a national loyalty compact. The idea? Forge a cross-industry alliance to preserve domestic employment, no matter the sector. It's bold, unprecedented, and controversial. Some union veterans express skepticism. Can digital resistance replace boots on the ground? Others argue it's the only path forward. Meanwhile, the damage deepens beyond labor. In the quiet corridors of state universities, lab lights blink out. When the email arrived, the entire advanced composites lab at Peoria State fell silent. Funding terminated. Effective immediately. The department head read it aloud, the sterile hallway amplifying the devastation. Doctoral students sat frozen. Their research, cutting-edge work on lightweight materials for Caterpillar's machines, was now dust in the air. One PhD candidate stared at his notes, realizing his meticulously planned career had just vanished. For decades, Caterpillar had been more than an employer. It was a patron of innovation. Its partnerships with universities drove breakthroughs in automation, materials science, and fuel efficiency. Peoria State had become a national engineering powerhouse, attracting talent from across the country. Now its labs sat dark, its reputation in retreat. Community colleges felt the blow too. Programs that once funneled skilled welders and machinists into Caterpillar's assembly lines were suddenly irrelevant. Enrollment tanked. Students questioned whether investing in heavy equipment skills made any sense anymore. Instructors, many of whom spent careers designing specialized curricula, watched their programs gutted, fearing layoffs themselves. The entire STEM pipeline began to collapse. Scholarships evaporated, internships disappeared. Disillusioned students fled to tech and healthcare fields. Even high schoolers who once dreamed of building machines were reconsidering, ambitions fading in the shadow of economic upheaval. But the consequences reached beyond education. In Washington, alarms began sounding at the Department of Defense. A confidential Pentagon memo warned of rising national security risks. For years, Caterpillar-built equipment had been essential to military logistics and battlefield engineering. Now, with production moving overseas, the military faced dangerous supply chain vulnerabilities. The memo was blunt. Outsourcing undermined readiness. It increased risks of espionage, sabotage, and intellectual property theft. Reliance on foreign factories for critical infrastructure was a strategic liability. Congress convened hearings. Lawmakers grilled defense officials about the wisdom of awarding contracts to companies manufacturing abroad. Could American security standards be upheld across international borders? Could allies be trusted with equipment blueprints and component supply? Defense officials didn't sugarcoat the answer. No. The senator's question echoed through the hearing chamber, unanswered, unanswerable. Across the Pacific, China needed no such introspection. The retreat of Caterpillar became an inflection point. State-supported conglomerates, long preparing in the shadows, surged forward. Aerospace and heavy equipment divisions ramped up production, rapidly introducing new models engineered to seize the market vacuum. The global balance of manufacturing power shifted, not with explosions or headlines, but with quiet, calibrated ambition. A new geography of bolts. Where once a finished machine traveled a few hundred miles from factory to field, now every bolt, valve, and gasket crossed oceans. Caterpillar's U.S. manufacturing footprint had been erased and reimagined. Logistics were no longer about efficiency. They were about endurance. Vietnamese foundries forged essential steel components. Brazilian plants churned out high-pressure hydraulic systems. Canadian factories, buoyed by Prime Minister Mark Carney's aggressive industrial incentives, built complex electronic sub-assemblies. The map was redrawn, but so too was the company's mindset. What once had been a U.S.-centered manufacturing philosophy, grounded in proximity, quality control, and workforce loyalty, was now a spreadsheet-driven experiment in global sourcing. Executives pitched it as access to new markets and cost savings. But what emerged was something very different: vulnerability. Shipping costs ballooned. Components traveled thousands of miles, routed through 3, sometimes 4 ports. Each added handoff multiplied the risk: delays, mishandling, customs complications. Port congestion in Southeast Asia and Latin America meant essential parts sat untouched for weeks. A single mismachined valve, discovered too late, halted a $1 billion mining project in Latin America. Inside Caterpillar's U.S. facilities, chaos ruled. Engineers accustomed to real-time collaboration with local suppliers now navigated 13-hour time gaps and Zoom calls riddled with translation errors. Quality inspections were no longer tactile. They were pixelated, lagging across weak Wi-Fi. Production schedules buckled. Downtime became routine. Repair parts ran late. Farmers missed planting windows. Mining firms faced critical lulls. Construction crews sat idle as machines gathered dust. Customers began to ask hard questions. Some walked. Hidden costs mounted. Insurance premiums for transoceanic shipments spiked, reflecting risks of political unrest, trade disputes, and climate-driven disruptions. Suppliers hedged with flexible contracts, wary of promising delivery dates they couldn't meet. The once flawless choreography of Caterpillar's supply chain had disintegrated into a logistical street fight. In the diplomatic corridors, the tremors were felt and exploited. Rivals moved fast, allies recalibrated. Heavy equipment was no longer just hardware, it was leverage. Backhoes became bargaining chips. China saw it all as green light and opportunity. State-backed equipment. Manufacturers were deployed like economic troops. Infrastructure deals bundled with heavy machinery, offers surged into Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia. Beijing's pitch was simple. Why wait on U.S. delivery delays when you can have reliable Chinese support now? At Global Infrastructure, Summits, Belt and Road. Initiative nations rolled out red carpets for Caterpillar, lavish tax breaks, simplified permitting, guaranteed labor stability. Their message: set up shop here, get closer to your growth markets. Leave behind the burdens of U.S. regulation and labor unrest. And in many cases, Caterpillar listened. But the move came with a cost: a fractured identity, a weakened core, and an open flank. This sharply contrasted with the tightening regulations and rising labor costs faced by American manufacturers during President Donald Trump's tariff era. In Canada, Prime Minister Mark Carney acted quickly to rebrand his nation as a stable, business-friendly option. He introduced fast-tracked environmental permits and publicly funded infrastructure projects aimed at attracting Caterpillar's manufacturing operations northward. Ottawa's economic strategists argued these policies could secure long-term high-wage jobs and solidify Canada's industrial leadership. However, concerns began to emerge among long-standing U.S. allies. Doubts arose about America's reliability as a supplier in key sectors like defense and critical infrastructure. If the U.S. could no longer ensure domestic production of essential equipment, could it still maintain industrial influence? Defense partners grew uneasy about the security and stability of supply chains. Diplomatic memos expressed growing anxiety over the strategic risks of relying on foreign-made machinery. Once a symbol of U.S. soft power, Caterpillar had become central in geopolitical negotiations. Nations started rethinking procurement contracts, trying to balance the need for reliable suppliers with the potential consequences of outsourcing. Carney's push to keep manufacturing nearby brought some reassurance, but also highlighted the broader decline of American industrial supremacy. Wall Street's tepid applause. Profits today, problems tomorrow. Investors initially responded positively to Caterpillar's cost-cutting and international expansion strategy. The company's stock rose 8% after the announcement, driven by promises of higher margins and better access to emerging markets. The CEO described the move as a strategic necessity in a cutthroat global environment, but beneath the surface, concerns festered. Insurance companies increased premiums for political risk coverage, pointing to instability in some of Caterpillar's new host countries. Sovereign risk analysts warned of regulatory unpredictability and potential conflict disrupting operations. The company's brand image suffered. A recent survey of fleet managers showed a 12-point drop in trust related to Caterpillar's reliability and service. Fears about delayed maintenance, spare parts shortages, and declining quality led some customers to consider competitors, who aggressively pitched their offerings as more stable and consistent. Internally, employee morale fell. US-based workers questioned whether Caterpillar still valued its American roots, while international hires worried about their job security amid shifting political climates. The company's once solid reputation now seemed like a thing of the past. Communities in transition. From bulldozers to biotech, in towns that had long depended on Caterpillar, local leaders began planning for a post-Caterpillar future. Some communities explored ways to attract new industries and investment. In Peoria, the Future Works Hub initiative was launched to bring in renewable energy companies and advanced manufacturing startups using existing industrial infrastructure, while training workers for emerging sectors. Federal aid came through the Commerce Department's Resiliency Fund, which matched local funds to support economic diversification. There were early wins, such as wind turbine manufacturers setting up pilot facilities and startups hiring former machinists for precision work, but obstacles remained. Venture capital was still cautious, and many startups struggled in the uncertain economic environment. Community colleges updated their programs with courses in robotics and automation to help displaced workers reskill. The shift was difficult and slow, with many people struggling to let go of the familiar and adapt to unfamiliar technologies. Congress takes action. Economic patriotism in policy. In response, Congress proposed legislation aimed at softening the impact and encouraging U.S.-based production. These proposals, framed as promoting economic patriotism, included tax incentives for companies that kept jobs in the U.S. and penalties for those moving operations abroad. The Made in America Act sought to boost domestic manufacturing, with tax breaks, grants, and preferences in government procurement. The National Association of Manufacturers pushed back strongly against proposed legislation, warning that such moves could trigger retaliation abroad and hurt America's global competitiveness. On the other side, the populist caucus, closely aligned with Donald Trump's America First agenda, called for even harsher policies, including punitive tariffs on companies that shifted production overseas. Trump repeatedly emphasized his stance. American jobs must be protected, and corporations that abandon the U.S. would face consequences. Prime Minister Mark Carney, meanwhile, cautioned about the dangers of an impending subsidy war.